Have you ever sat in a room full of people and still felt completely alone? Have you ever scrolled endlessly through social media, surrounded by noise, distractions, and everyone's so-called perfect lives? And yet, deep inside, there's this silence. Not peace, calm, but a silence that echoes something deeper. The realization that maybe, just maybe, you don't really know who you are without all of them. Let that settle for a moment. Because here's the truth no one wants to tell you. Being alone is not weakness. It's not something to run from. It's not something to escape with temporary people, shallow conversations, or the illusion of connection. Being alone is power. But only when you learn how to sit with it. When you stop fighting the silence and start listening to it, that's when you meet yourself. You see, most people fear solitude because in solitude, there's nowhere to hide. There's no one to validate you, no one to perform for, no audience to clap for your filtered moments. When you're alone, you see every part of yourself. Your insecurities, your dreams, lies, your truth. And that's uncomfortable. But that's also where you begin to build real strength. Powerful people are not built in crowds. They are forged in quiet moments, in private battles, in the discipline of being okay with who they are when no one's watching. That's where confidence is born. You want to become unshakable. Then learn to stand alone. Be so comfortable in your own presence that no one else becomes your crutch. Because if you need people to feel worthy, to feel seen, to feel strong, then you've already given your power away. I've been there. I've sat in rooms where I felt invisible. I've walked into places where I didn't belong, didn't fit in, didn't connect. And for the longest time, I thought something was wrong with me. But I learned. I learned that solitude isn't isolation. It's not rejection. It's the space where you sharpen your instincts, reclaim your voice, and stop asking for permission to exist. Most people spend their entire lives running from themselves. They chase noise, attention, validation, anything to keep from being still. Because when you're still, when you're truly alone with no one to impress and nowhere to hide, that's when your truth shows up. And let me tell you something. It's not always pretty. It's not dressed in confidence or filtered through a perfect caption. It's raw. It's real. It's that voice inside you that you've buried under people's expectations and your own fear of not being enough. But that voice, that version of you've been avoiding, that's where your real power lies. You can't build anything lasting on a foundation of denial. You can't know what you're capable of if you haven't first looked at what you've been avoiding. That's why solitude matters. Because in that quiet space, all the masks fall away. You stop pretending. You stop performing. You start facing what's actually there. And that truth, however uncomfortable it is the only place real strength is born. It's not about being perfect. It's about being honest with yourself. Who are you when no one's clapping? Who are you when no one's watching? That's what you find when you're alone. And that's the beginning of everything. We've been conditioned to believe that being alone means something's wrong. That if you're not surrounded by people, if your phone isn't buzzing, if your calendar isn't full, then you're somehow losing. But that's a lie. That's the narrative built by people who are terrified of their own reflection. Because the second the crowd disappears, they don't know who they are anymore. You want to know real power. It's not found in a room full of people who don't even see you. It's not found in likes or followers or fake friendships. Real power is being able to sit by yourself and feel complete, unshaken, not needing anyone to fill the silence because the silence doesn't scare you. It strengthens you. Being alone is not weakness. It's not lack. It's not something to fix. It's a discipline. It's a weapon. Because when you learn how to stand alone, you stop depending on the world to tell your worth. You stop chasing approval and start walking in truth. You stop breaking down every time someone walks away because you've already built a life that doesn't collapse when you're the only one holding it up. That's what makes you untouchable. That's what makes you dangerous in the best possible way. Not because you don't need people, but because you're not afraid to be without them. Confidence isn't loud. It's not flashy. It's not the person talking over everyone in the room, trying to prove they're important. That's not strength. That's insecurity wearing a mask. True confidence is quiet. It's grounded. And it's born in the silence, not in the spotlight. You build it when no one is watching. When you're alone and still choose to show up for yourself. When you're not being validated, but you keep going anyway. That's where the real work happens. Away from applause, away from recognition, just you and your decisions. Most people only feel good when someone else tells them they're good. They need a pat on the back to move forward, a like, to feel beautiful, a compliment to believe they have value. But when your confidence is rooted in other people, it crumbles the second they stop clapping. So what happens when you're alone? What happens when no one's around to tell you who you are? That's when you find out what you're really made of. And if you've done the inner work in the silence, if you've had those honest conversations with yourself, faced your flaws, owned your worth, then no one can take that from you. Because you didn't borrow that confidence. You built it. You cannot build real strength if you're always leaning on someone else to hold you up. You can't develop resilience if your emotional survival depends on whether or not someone calls you back, compliments you, or includes you. And the hard truth is, most people never realize how much of their power they've handed away. Every time you wait for someone to validate your worth, every time you shrink so someone else can feel bigger, every time you change who you are to be accepted, you're weakening the foundation of who you are. That's not strength. That's dependency. And dependency masquerading as connection will destroy you. You want to be powerful. Learn to be emotionally self-sufficient. Learn to show up for yourself without waiting for someone else to do it first. That doesn't mean you don't love, or care, or build relationships. It means you don't need them to survive. You choose them from a place of fullness. Because if the only reason you feel strong is because someone's standing next to you, what happens when they walk away? What happens when life hits and you're left to face it alone? If you haven't trained yourself to stand on your own, you'll collapse. But if you've done the work, if you've faced the discomfort of solitude, if you've stopped outsourcing your identity, then no matter who leaves, you stay rooted. You stay whole. That's how you reclaim your power. When you're constantly surrounded by noise, by people, by opinions, by distractions, you stop hearing yourself. Your instincts get drowned out. Your inner compass, the one that's built to guide you, gets silenced under everyone else's voices. But the moment you step into solitude, everything shifts. That stillness, that quiet space where it's just you and your thoughts. That's not emptiness. That's clarity. That's where your instincts wake up. That's where your intuition sharpens like a blade. You start to notice the things you used to ignore. You pick up on energies faster. You sense when something feels off. You read people more clearly, not through words, but through truth. Because when you've spent time alone, you've trained yourself to observe without reacting, to feel without being overwhelmed. That's how you develop the kind of awareness that can't be taught in books or handed to you by someone else. It's earned. It's built. And once you have it, no one can manipulate you because you see through the act. No one can lead you astray because you trust your own direction. That's the gift solitude gives you. The kind of inner knowing that makes you untouchable in a world full of noise. When you're at peace with being alone, your entire standard for what you allow into your life shifts. You're no longer desperate for company. You're no longer saying yes just to avoid the fear of being by yourself. You start looking at people, situations, opportunities through a different lens, not from a place of lack, but from strength. You no longer chase. You choose. You stop entertaining the bare minimum because you've tasted the freedom that comes with solitude, and you know now, peace is priceless. When you're okay on your own, you don't tolerate people who drain you, confuse you, or make you question your worth. You don't cling to relationships out of fear. You don't keep friends who belittle you just to have someone to text. And you definitely don't settle for half love, fake support, or conditional loyalty. You set the bar higher, because you've already learned how to meet your own needs. So now, anyone who steps into your life has to add to it. They're not there to complete you. They're there to grow with you. And if they can't match that energy, you don't beg them to stay. You let them go. Because when you've built peace in solitude, chaos in company is no longer attractive. When you've walked through fire alone, when you've faced your own mind in silence and made peace with your own company, something inside you changes. You stop being easily shaken. You stop reacting emotionally to things that used to rattle you. People will test you. Life will hit you. Some will disappoint you. Some will leave. But when you've trained yourself to stand alone, your first instinct won't be to break. It'll be to breathe, to observe, to respond. Not from emotion, not from fear, not from insecurity, but from power. You become grounded in a way that others can't understand. They don't see the countless nights you sat with your pain, the times you questioned everything and chose to rise anyway. They don't know what it took to build that inner fortress. So, when the world pushes you, when it throws you into uncertainty, you don't panic. You anchor. You lock into what you know about yourself. Because you've already survived every dark season alone. You've already rebuilt yourself from nothing. There is no storm stronger than a woman who has already weathered herself. People who have never stood alone will always be at the mercy of their environment. One bad day, and they collapse. One rejection, and they crumble. One harsh comment, and they spiral. That's because their sense of self was never theirs to begin with. It was stitched together from external opinions, temporary praise, shallow attachments. But when you've done the work in solitude, when your identity is forged by your own hand, not handed to you by others, you become emotionally bulletproof. You feel the sting of life, sure, but it doesn't destroy you. You bend, you adapt, but you don't break. You know who you are now, and that knowing becomes your armor. Think about it. How many people do you know who lose themselves in relationships? Who change with every crowd they join? Who chase validation like it's oxygen? That's not confidence. That's survival through codependency. That's living on borrowed strength. And the danger in that is simply, the second those people walk away, your whole identity goes with them. You lose your voice, your power, your peace. But when you've taken the time to sit in your own silence, to hear your own thoughts, to clean out the clutter that doesn't belong to you, you walk into the world with something no one can take. Stability, presence, command. You don't respond to disrespect the same way anymore. You don't internalize people's projections. Someone questions your worth. You don't flinch, because you've already answered that question for yourself. You've stood in your own presence and decided, without applause, that you are enough. That decision wasn't made in a crowd. It was made in the quiet, in the discomfort, in the stillness most people try to escape. And that's why you hold it with such strength. Because you earned it. And what you earn, you protect. You'll notice that people who fear being alone are always looking for something to latch onto. They rush into situations without thinking. They tolerate chaos because they're more afraid of being by themselves than being disrespected. But when you embrace solitude, your fear shifts. You stop fearing loneliness. You start fearing the loss of peace. You don't avoid alone time anymore. You crave it. Because in that space you recharge. You reset. You realign. So when you step back into the world, you're not reacting. You're choosing. You start to trust your instincts more because you've removed the noise. You've trained your emotional muscles through discipline. You've learned not to speak every time you're triggered. You've learned to listen not just to respond, but to understand. You've created a kind of internal stability that no outside storm can disrupt. That's the strength most people never access. Because it takes discomfort. It takes time. It takes silence. And silence terrifies the ones who don't know what's living inside of them. But you've faced it. You've heard the doubts, the insecurities, the pain, and you didn't run. You sat with it. You asked the hard questions. You got real about your patterns. You stared into the parts of yourself that others avoid, and you didn't look away. That's why you're not emotionally fragile anymore. That's why you're not desperate for outside reassurance. You've built your foundation brick by brick, and it wasn't always pretty. But it's yours. So now, when life tests you, and it will, you respond with stillness, with clarity. You don't go back and forth with people who don't deserve your energy. You don't chase people to prove your value. You don't explain yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You've outgrown that. You've grown into a version of yourself that knows peace is more valuable than being liked, and silence is often more powerful than reacting. You begin to choose differently. You walk away quicker. You don't hold on to what's not aligned. And that's not cold, it's evolved, it's strategic. Because emotional discipline is not about pretending nothing affects you. It's about choosing what's worth affecting you. It's about recognizing that your energy is currency, and you no longer spend it on things that drain you. Not because you're hard, but because you're whole. And the irony is, when you master being alone, when you stop depending on people to fill your cup, you start attracting those who actually respect you, because you radiate a presence that's not needy, not clingy, not desperate, but solid. You show up from abundance, not lack. And people feel that. They sense that you're not playing games, that you're not molding yourself to fit in, that you're not seeking validation. You are validation, because the woman who is good alone is the woman no one can control. That's the kind of power you step into when you stop fearing solitude. You realize that being emotionally unshakable isn't about being tough, it's about being grounded, rooted, intentional. You're not reacting anymore, you're deciding, and that changes everything. You become the calm in the chaos, the clarity in the confusion, the strength in the silence. And that right there is what makes you unstoppable. There's a certain edge that only comes from mastering your mind when no one else is around to distract you from it. When you strip away the noise, when you stop numbing with constant stimulation, you're left face to face with your own thoughts. And that moment, it's not easy, it's not glamorous. It's the part where most people tap out. But if you stay, if you lean in, you start to build a discipline that can't be broken. You learn how to think clearly under pressure. You learn how to manage your emotions instead of being ruled by them. That's mental discipline. And that's what solitude demands from you. Because when there's no one to vent to, no one to blame, no one to pacify your discomfort, you either spiral or you train. And I mean train. Like an athlete preparing for battle, you begin to push through the mental resistance. You stop giving every emotion a reaction. You stop feeding every fear. You stop entertaining the lies that once ran unchecked in your mind. You confront them. You challenge them. And in doing so, you create space for truth. Not opinions, not projections, truth. The truth of who you are, what you want, and what's no longer acceptable in your life. That level of mental clarity doesn't show up by accident. It's built in the moments where you want to quit, where the silence gets loud, where the pain rises and you don't reach for distraction. You sit with it. You breathe through it, and you learn how to keep going, not because someone else told you to, but because you decided you would. That's where your edge is formed, in the solitude that forces you to grow up emotionally, mentally, spiritually. You stop being a passenger in your own life and start driving every decision with purpose. Mental discipline is what separates the ones who react from the ones who lead. Anyone can talk tough. Anyone can post about confidence. But when life hits hard, when you lose, when you fail, when you get rejected, only the disciplined remain grounded. Only the ones who have practiced stillness, who have controlled the inner chaos, know how to move forward without losing themselves in the process. And if you've done that work in solitude, you already know you're no longer driven by urgency, desperation, or impulse. You move with precision. So now, when anxiety creeps in, you don't panic, you pause. When fear shows up, you don't run, you examine it. You've trained your mind not to flinch at discomfort, but to find data in it. You ask better questions. You make smarter moves. You see situations for what they are, not what your emotions try to convince you they are. That's mental freedom. That's the kind of power that doesn't scream. But when it enters the room, everyone feels it. And the most powerful part, you realize that your peace doesn't depend on everything going right. It depends on how disciplined you are when everything goes wrong. You learn how to hold the line, your line. You protect your time, your focus, your vision. You don't let temporary emotions make permanent decisions. You don't hand your power to people who haven't earned it. That kind of control, that kind of focus, comes from solitude. It comes from choosing growth over comfort again and again, until it becomes who you are. So if you've spent time alone, if you've built that discipline brick by brick, don't ever underestimate the advantage you now carry. While others break under pressure, you remain composed. While others react, you execute. While others search for direction, you already know where you're going. That's the difference. That's the weapon. And that's why solitude doesn't make you weaker. It makes you dangerous in all the right ways. When you finally get comfortable being alone, something powerful happens. You stop performing. You stop shifting into what other people expect. You stop walking into rooms and scanning for approval. Because when you've already accepted yourself in the dark, you don't need the spotlight to feel seen. You no longer need to be someone else's version of acceptable. You show up as you are, unapologetic, unfiltered, and fully present. That kind of authenticity is rare, because most people are too busy curating a version of themselves they think the world will like. But you've done the inner work. You've sat in your own presence long enough to know who you are. And once you know who you are, you stop asking for permission to exist. When you stop performing, you start making decisions from truth, not from fear. You don't say yes just to avoid conflict. You don't shrink to make others feel secure. You don't silence your voice because someone else can't handle your power. You start moving from a place of alignment. Your words match your values. Your actions match your standards. And you stop compromising your peace just to make others comfortable. That's not arrogance. That's integrity. Because the real you is no longer hidden behind people-pleasing. You've pulled the mask off, and you've decided that your identity isn't up for negotiation. And the beautiful part, you attract differently. When you're real, when you're whole, when you're not performing, you start to draw in people who want truth, not a show. You stop entertaining surface-level conversations. You stop chasing shallow validation. You build deeper relationships because you're coming from depth. You've stripped away the act, and what's left is something solid, something grounded. And when you live from that place, you don't just feel confident. You are confident. You trust your instincts. You back your decisions. You don't look around the room wondering if you're enough, because you've already decided that you are. This is the power of solitude. It forces you to face the question most people avoid: who am I when no one's watching? Who am I when there's no one to impress? The answer you find becomes your foundation. And once you're rooted in that truth, nothing outside of you can shake what's inside of you. You stop playing the role. You stop seeking applause. You live real. You live free. And that's where everything changes. There's something magnetic about a person who walks into a room and doesn't need to be noticed, because they already know who they are. They don't chase attention. They don't crave validation. They don't bend themselves to fit someone else's mold. They're not loud, but their presence says everything. That's what happens when you become someone who's at peace being alone. You no longer operate from emptiness. You operate from overflow. You're not searching for someone to complete you. You've already done that for yourself. When you've built your confidence in solitude, people feel it. You don't even have to speak it. They can sense it in your energy. Because true confidence isn't about how much you talk. It's in how you carry yourself. It's in the way you look people in the eye, the way you stand your ground, the way you're not afraid of silence, of stillness, of your own company. You don't need a crowd to feel worthy. You don't need noise to feel alive. You've already cultivated a life so full, so rich with purpose and peace, that you bring that energy everywhere you go, and others can't help but be drawn to it. People who are afraid to be alone constantly seek something external to make them feel whole. They fill their time, their feeds, their calendars with distraction. But wholeness doesn't come from the outside in. It comes from doing the hard work, sitting in the silence, confronting your pain, healing what's broken, and choosing to rise stronger. That inner power. It builds a quiet, unshakable confidence, one that doesn't scream for attention, but commands respect. You show up to life differently. You stop begging to be seen because you see yourself. You stop over-explaining, over-apologizing, over-giving. You no longer look to others to define your worth because you've already done that work alone. And now, every word you speak carries weight. Every step you take is intentional. Every boundary you set is respected, not because you demand it, but because you embody it. That's the energy that creates impact. That's the kind of presence that transforms rooms, changes conversations, and draws high-value people toward you. Not because you're trying to prove something, but because you've already proven it to yourself. Confidence built in solitude doesn't need to convince anyone. It simply is. It radiates from the inside out. And when you have that, you don't need to chase anything. you attract everything that's meant for you. So now you know, solitude isn't your enemy, it's your proving ground. It's not the absence of something, it's the presence of everything that's real inside of you. If you can learn to be alone and not just survive it, but thrive in it, you'll unlock a strength that most people never even get close to. Because when you stop fearing your own presence, you step into your power. You stop performing, you stop chasing, and you start owning who you are. Fully, fiercely, and unapologetically. That's the kind of woman who doesn't break under pressure. That's the kind of woman who doesn't just walk through life, she leads it. Alone if necessary, empowered always.